Hi everyone, I'm John Boughton with NAR Media. As you may have already heard in the news, the Federal Communications Commission is set to make a big decision about net neutrality next week, and in fact, they're planning to roll back the net neutral rules that NAR supports. This has big implications for real estate, as companies like Comcast, Verizon, and other internet service providers could offer so-called fast lanes for some websites while actually lowering the consumer experience on other websites. Big implications for real estate, certainly for the way people buy and sell homes. So we're going to talk a little bit about this today with some experts we've assembled. Melanie Wine is joining us from NAR Government Affairs. Melanie, thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
And joining us remotely is David Sharon. He is the president and CEO of MRIS, as well as the president-elect of the Council of MLSs. David's joining us from his office in Rockville. David, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you fine.
Thank you very much for being here. We're going to jump right into this. Melanie, I sort of teed up a little bit the net neutrality issue at the front, but there's probably some people out there who don't really know what net neutrality is or why this is important. Can you just talk to us quickly about what net neutrality means?
Sure. So net neutrality is the idea or the concept that all content flows without discrimination across the internet, that internet service providers are essentially pipes that deliver that content, and that they currently, under current rules, are prohibited from blocking or discriminating against content or slowing it down in any way. And this is really the fundamental principle that the internet has been based on. What we're concerned about is what may be happening, or what we expect to be happening at the Federal Communications Commission next week. It's actually a week from today, on December 14th. The FCC is getting ready to roll back all of those rules. So there will be essentially no regulatory cop on the beat setting rules about how traffic flows on the internet.
Big issue, and I should have said at the top, we are going to be taking questions throughout this broadcast. So if you have questions either about what net neutrality is, what it means for your business or your clients, or why you should be concerned, feel free to drop your question into the comment box. We're going to get to as many as we can. And Melanie, you started to get into this about why NAR is so concerned about this. We've been on this case for a while. I mean, what are the ongoing concerns right now?
Well, essentially our concern is, our main point is, we like the way the internet operates today. And I think David can speak to this in a minute about why the internet is so important to the real estate industry today. We think things are working fine now. We're particularly concerned about the possibility that internet service providers will create fast lanes using what they call paid prioritization, which means that your internet service provider, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, would be able to negotiate sweetheart deals with large content providers. So essentially, big corporations get their content delivered across the internet faster and more efficiently than smaller players, and we think this is very, very troubling and very threatening for the real estate industry.
David, I want to let you jump in on that. I mean, since you're our real estate professional, you're the person who's got the sort of the ear to the ground on some of this. I mean, what does this all mean to you?
Well, we as consumers, and I think, from the MLS community, we represent a lot of Main Streeters, and we rely on the internet the same way we rely on air. We can't survive without it. And so if net neutrality bellies up, internet access could end up just like cable bundles. My friend Matt Cohen speaks pretty eloquently about this, but you remember what happened with cable bundles. It started at $25, and then we could get it without TV ads, and then basic cable went to $35, and then to $50, and then the ads came back, and then it's $100, and now we're paying another $100 for premium channels. And while cable is entertainment, internet is needed for schools and for jobs and for Main Street people and companies and for all of us to communicate with our families and to conduct business. So allowing an increasingly consolidated industry comprised of the very same entities that took advantage of us once before to then have the same potential to raise these barriers to introduce discriminatory practices, to me, is a very frightening proposition. The major benefit of this initiative should be threefold, and that's the promise of cost containment, the promise of improved services, and the promises of fair access. And none of these are apparent in any kind of a rollback.
Well, I strongly suspect, since you raised the specter of the big cable companies and the bill, everybody out there who's watching this today has paid their cable bill and wondered why it's gotten so high. So I think you're probably getting to the right track. Melanie, looking backwards, though, I have to think there's going to be some people who look at this and say, okay, the Federal Communications Commission is rolling back a rule that hasn't really gone into place. We're going backwards to the internet the way it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. That was okay. So what's the problem?
Well, actually, first of all, there were problems before the net neutrality rules were put in place. There were examples of internet service providers throttling content, and one of the major concerns is, as there's consolidation within industries, as internet service providers end up buying content providers, there's concern that there's a natural inclination then to favor your own content when there's not a clear demarcation between I am just providing access to content versus I'm creating content. So there's a concern there. And there have been instances in the past where internet service providers in the pre-net neutrality days throttled content or blocked content. So we'd hate to see that. Also, a thing to also keep in mind is this is actually a fairly radical proposal that the FCC is engaged in. They're not only rolling back the rules that were put in place in 2015, they're actually removing all of their authority, or not all of their authority, most of their authority to regulate the internet. They're basically saying the large internet companies, they can regulate themselves with the exception of there is a transparency rule, which basically states that before internet service companies, once this order is put in place, before an internet service company can throttle your content or block your content, they have to tell you that they're doing so. So that's essentially the only rule that will be left in place after this order goes through. And then as I mentioned earlier, as far as any type of regulatory cop on the beat, policing what's happening with your broadband service, that's all going to be left to the Federal Trade Commission to be handled basically through anti-competitive types of situations, which is very complex, and we're just concerned that essentially leaves this industry unregulated.
Well, complexity is what we're here for. So, and I'll say this again, if people have questions about what this means for their business or for their clients, drop them into the comment box. We're going to get to a bunch of them. David, I'm going to give you the next one. Since you're from the MLS community, maybe you can give us a sense of kind of the insider's take on this. I mean, what's the conversation like between MLS executives, and what are they looking at?
Well, we do discuss the issue, but I have to confess it's reviewed as kind of a black swan, or potentially some form of government regulation that we'd have to adhere to. But importantly, all of my peers support the NAR position, which essentially accrues to the consumer or the Main Street practitioner. In fact, CMLS is in complete support of this coalition, thanks to the good work that Danae and Carrie did with Melanie to get us 100% behind it. So, we are. I want to go back to the fact that it's just hard to be entirely constructive about this as it relates to bringing back the very same entities that took advantage of us 12 years ago. Do we think now they are reformed? And if so, can we really expect them that they won't take any advantage of us again? So we are from a practitioner standpoint, without NAR helping us in this fight, we really don't have a second line of defense here. So it's very, very important that NAR and its aligned organizations really pull together and support this completely. Well,
maybe you can give some examples here. I'm curious what the real on-the-ground effect on an MLS would be, or maybe you can speak to brokerages or even entities like Realtor.com too. I mean, what do you think?
Well, my guess is nothing's going to happen immediately. Life is going to go unchanged, but we shouldn't confuse the silence that we hear as some kind of a Zen moment, or see calm water and confuse it at all with safety. At some point, the lines are going to be drawn by the major providers, and that really deals with greed and speed. Greed because the beast is going to have to be fed so shareholders of these major corporations can benefit, and speed simply because our society, all of us on the receiving end of this unfortunate event, we're conditioned for speed. We have fast foods, we have fast lanes, we have fast lines, instant information. We can monitor our homes via the internet. When there's a breakdown, when we do have to wait, if we can't think about, how much longer is this going to take? Only total and complete abstinence can wean us off this powerful yet essential drug called the internet. And again, it's like air. We can't survive without it. And because of what we will be forced to pay, if in fact we are forced to pay premiums, we will be subservient to greed. And I realize that's a bit dramatic. But let's imagine a major portal that is fast by default because the entity can afford to pay the premium, and they use speed as their marketing differentiator. Well, the broker may not have that same advantage, so the broker is in the slow lane, and any subscription to the fast lane has to be optional.
So you've got two scenarios then. You're either charged a premium or you're at a competitive disadvantage.
You really are. So the broker really isn't going to have any choice but to do that. And then he's going to have to, or she's going to have to be forced to hope that they're going to pony up more monies just to keep pace, and that they're going to be able to cover their expenses. And I would also say, what does this do for innovation? If new companies can't afford to be in the fast lane because so many of us use basic cable, are we effectively priced out? So if a huge company can buy a spot in the fast lane that we can't compete with, or that our customers will have to pay more or wait longer to have access to their own site's content, that's just crazy. And we haven't even gotten into the security-related issues associated with this. I mean, lots of brokers are going through wire fraud, so they're looking at going back to VPNs, which is a closed network. And, are we going to get those things throttled back? Or are these major companies, the other thing that's involved in this, Melanie, we haven't talked about this, is big data. I mean, understanding what our preferences and our behaviors are really accrues to the company that collects all that information. And so, we'll say, well, you give up your privacy and we'll give you speed in exchange. Well, we're going to pay them we're going to mortgage our future in that fashion, or are we going to pony up the cash right away? It's a lousy decision.
Well, and it's interesting. Jumping back, you said at the top of your comments, about the relative silence on this issue. Melanie, maybe you can give us a sense here in Washington. Are you getting a sense that there's silence on this, or are people engaged?
No, absolutely not. In fact, just today here in Washington, there are activists out resisting and protesting this move that's about to happen. We expect that's going to continue on for the next 7 days up until the order is voted on in the FCC. And in fact, the backlash to this has been pretty dramatic. Just before we came down to do this Facebook Live, I was reading some statistics. There was actually an Ipsos poll that polled Americans about how they felt on various issues, and in particular on the fast lane issue that David was speaking to. There were only 14% of Americans in that poll that supported the FCC imposing a fast lane. And I just want to echo the comments that David was making. I think he really draws a good picture of how small businesses in this scenario are impacted, because it's the large companies who can probably afford to pay the fees for the fast lane, that may in fact encourage greater consolidation. So large companies are going to become larger, and it just makes it harder for small businesses to compete in that environment.
Well, and I should say I am starting to see some questions roll in. I appreciate that. Keep them coming. We're going to get to them. We've talked about the business side. Certainly, David gave us a good picture of that, and you as well, Melanie. What about on the consumer side? I mean, if net neutrality were to go away, is this the sort of thing where the individual consumer is going to see higher cost as well, or what's the effect for them? I'll let Melanie go first.
Yeah,
David,
I think that's a very likely scenario, and as David even mentioned sooner, what I've heard is that if you like the way you get your cable service today, you're going to love the way your internet is going to be tomorrow. That we can imagine a scenario where you have to buy packages for what sites you access. There'll be the Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat package, or just as an example, and that there will be sort of a cableization of the internet. And I think, talk to any consumer on the street, I don't think anybody's going to be very happy about that.
If anything you wanted to add on to
that? Are you asking me what the effects will be from the consumer standpoint? Because Melanie was coming in and out on that last one.
We lost you a little bit on the sound. Yeah, really just the consumer side of things. What is your, maybe you're hearing it from even friends and relatives, but certainly, you as an internet user yourself. I mean, what are your concerns from the consumer side?
Well, I'm gonna have to guess at some of what you asked, and I apologize. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great. You're fine.
Okay, you're coming in and out. But anyway, look, the ISPs are not advocating for this change to make less money. This is really about greed. And will they get it from businesses, consumers, or both? And would it happen right away or after a few years, like the cable companies did, waiting for full adoption to make their move? Well, guess what? All of us already use the internet. According to Pew Research, 277 million out of the 318 million in the United States had access in 2015. That's 87%. So we really are in full adoption mode. The average household, Pew Research did a study, and the average household was found to have at least 7 active devices in use every day, while at the top end of the spectrum, 6% of the households tuned in with more than 15 active devices. So my question is, come on, guys, we're feeding the sharks here by thinking that this thing is going to get better.
Well, so, a question just came in from Matt on Facebook, and thank you for the question, Matt. He wanted to know if NAR is going to do a call for action on this. Now, I'm going to jump in and say it's probably a little early to go that far, and obviously NAR is in the midst of a call for action on tax reform. But Melanie, maybe you can tell us, what does NAR plan to do? I've read about lawsuits, I've read about other activities.
Yeah, this is a good time probably to just even talk about what the process is going to be going forward, what's going to happen here. So there is an FCC, Federal Communications Commission, open meeting scheduled for next week, next Thursday, December 14th. At that meeting, we expect this order, the Preserving Internet Freedom Order, to be adopted. That's the title of it. At that point, we do expect there to be a number of lawsuits filed challenging various aspects of this order. NAR is part of a coalition of businesses that include some large technology companies as well as some smaller competitive internet service providers. And as part of that coalition, we will be part probably of lawsuits going forward. And given that, so the lawsuits will be filed. Chances are there will be a request for a stay of proceedings, meaning that the court sort of freezes everything at the status quo, so that the order does not actually go into place until the lawsuit, the culmination of the lawsuit, and there's been a determination made. It's hard to say whether or not the court, there will definitely be a request for a stay. Whether a stay is actually granted, I can't say one way or another. So if there's a stay granted, nobody will see anything change while this whiles its way through the courts. That process will probably take about a year. And in the meantime, there's always the possibility for legislative action.
That was my next question.
There's interest really on both sides of this debate, because as we've seen, as history has shown us, this issue, if you leave it to the regulators, can sort of flip-flop back and forth every time there's a change in administration. It used to be that tech policy issues were not partisan issues, but unfortunately, everything today has sort of become a partisan issue. So within a change in administration, we could see the issue sort of flip back the other way. And so all parties involved understand that if we could legislate and actually get laws enacted that would be permanently in place, that would be to the advantage probably of all parties, but the rub there is just finding something that all parties can agree to. At that point, if there is legislation that's pending, that's probably the time that NAR would consider doing a call for action. So I would just say, stay tuned on the issue, and we've certainly been doing a lot of educating of our members on this issue. So if it comes to a point where we've got legislative pending and we're trying to see it move forward, we would probably reach out and have a call for action on this issue.
And David, thinking about that, I know we've talked about sort of where the level of engagement here. Would you say that the MLS community is pretty aware of this situation? If there was an action in Congress or in the courts, do the MLSs know about this?
Well, I would say not all. Certainly the ones that are participating in the corporate ally program of NAR certainly are. So I congratulate Melanie on keeping us all advised there. And if there's any listeners today that aren't participating in that, I strongly encourage them to do so, because they'll get briefed pretty quickly and pretty thoroughly on that. So the answer is, as I said, it's one of those events that we feel we don't have enormous amount of control over. And so all we can do is voice our concerns. And fortunately for us through NAR, our voice is heard, and therefore we are confident that the very best outcome will be achieved.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. And that's actually a question that just came in from Sandy as well, wanting to know, what are the, if we really are up against some of these big companies who are looking to see the net neutrality rules rolled back, I mean, what's our position here? Are we in a good place, or is this kind of tough times for this issue?
Well, actually, I think from what I understand from our coalition partners, we have a very solid legal footing in the legal challenge that's going forward. I was just on a phone call this morning where we were all talking about this, and one of the main lawyers involved in the matter, from our perspective on our side, was saying he felt very confident about our legal standing on a challenge on this matter. So while we're all but certain to lose at the FCC next week, we feel very confident about where we stand in the courts.
So I guess it's fair to say then, and for the people who are tuning in, I mean, they're going to see some news about this next week.
Yes.
And it's probably not going to be favorable. But then moving forward, there's going to be some legal activity that potentially could actually go in the right direction.
That's right.
Yeah, can I comment on Melanie's? Yeah, so there has to be a path forward, and one that really respects all sides, both sides, and that's to create new and better legislation that addresses the concerns on both sides and the business needs on the other. So it's easy to say no to the current regulation, and it's harder to say let's do something better. Let's replace. We saw that recently in the recent medical benefits arena, health benefits arena. So the chairman, I think, has to do something really better, but he's put nothing on the table, but no to the current regulations. So if he put something on there, we could be talking about it, we could be debating it, but that hasn't happened thus far. And that's where I think, to Melanie's point, in the ensuing weeks and months, that we will end up having that dialogue, because they are going to have to come to the table. And that's good.
Did you have something else you wanted to?
No.
So I will say, as we're sort of coming down towards the latter part of this broadcast, we do have time for a couple more questions. So if people want to send those my way, feel free. Kim had a question that I think is a good one. David, this might be a good one for you to start with. She asked whether or not a move like rolling back net neutrality could potentially have an impact on the decision for an agent which brokerage they end up going with. It's because it's sort of an uncomfortable thing, but is that something you hear from brokers?
Well, I think it's a real reasonable question. I mean, if the brokers are besieged with so many issues on their path to profitability. It's certainly their relationships with the agents and the splits that they have. It's bricks and mortar. It's recruiting and retention. It's data strategies. It's technology. It's any number of things. And if we start putting impediments in front of the broker to have access to his or her information, unfettered access and fast access, then yeah, I could see a brokerage pay a higher toll to differentiate itself from the rest of the pack, at the exclusion at the exclusion of someone who either can afford it or chooses to not do it. So I think it has potential also to create separate and entirely private entities. I think it could break up it has the potential to seriously impact organized real estate, not just from the agent's ability to access her information. I really believe that.
Yeah, this could be a challenge to smaller independent brokerages. I think that may be where the question was headed.
Competitive. I mean, not just where they might have higher costs or they might have a competitive disadvantage with some of but even on the hiring side or in bringing people into the firm.
Correct.
So, another question that came in, and I think this is probably a reasonable response to some of the conversations. I mean, on the consumer side, question was, if my ISP decides to jack up my rates, or if they're throttling service and I don't like the way they're doing, couldn't I just go somewhere else? I mean, is that a reasonable?
No, I think the answer to that is it depends on where you live. I mean, this is one of the big concerns in a normally operating market. That would be true, but in many communities, there's only one internet service provider, or maybe two. So the competition in this market is not very robust.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, there's potentially big challenges for people who are outside of larger urban markets.
Right. I think folks in rural areas are most likely to be the most impacted by something like this.
Well, I'm gonna add something here that may be a little bit out of my lane, and I'm probably going deeper than I should into this. But Verizon or AT&T or Comcast, they're the entity that sold the package, but they all rely on each other to get information across the internet and to its intended source. And if one of those breaks down, or one of them puts up a toll bridge and slows it down, it's not just one. This has got such opportunity for collusion, where people will work together to at the degradation of service for the many. This has just enormous implications. So, do you go to another provider? Sure, you could go to another provider and they could provide you some introductory fare. That might be good, but they all rely on each other to get that information. They call it the web for a reason. It's not just one entity that delivers all that information to you over one pipe.
Melanie, I mean, are there public ISPs that people could turn to, or are there really just a handful of companies out there that are doing this in those places?
I think in some communities there are a very small number of public internet service providers, but for the most part, most folks get their service, and certainly I think most businesses rely on the major carriers to get their internet service.
And if you don't have anything on this, that's fine. But my question would be, the big companies who are affected by this, what are they saying? I mean, what's their argument, or have they signaled what they would do under a non-net neutral world?
Well, most of them have said they're not interested in throttling or blocking traffic.
Throttling meaning
slowing it down, degrading the delivery of the content. Although I will say, we did see, prior to the rules being put in place, we did see a few examples of that sort of behavior happening.
Is that something you can share real quickly, what those examples were?
I
know, okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Actually, yeah, I was going to... I remember a few examples of throttling, but unfortunately I don't remember the specifics.
Sure.
What I can say is that both Comcast and AT&T in public comments very recently, given this most recent debate, have indicated that they do plan to go forward with fast lanes, with paid prioritization, and that's really, I think, what we're most concerned about is the paid prioritization issue.
And the fast lane, again, is where you have a company that pays to have their content pushed forward quicker.
Faster speeds, that's right. Your content is delivered faster than someone else's content, and as we all know, as people who surf the internet, if you go on a site and it's loading slowly, you're not going to, people's attention span, I think I've read the statistic, is 3 seconds. If you're not delivering that experience to that individual within 3 seconds, they're going to go someplace else where they're going to get a better experience.
Right, and that could potentially be a real estate professional's website. If it's going too slowly, they bail out, and that's the concern for an AR.
That's the concern.
So, and I don't want to take us, too far down this road, because hopefully we never get there. But, should net neutrality rules be rolled back? I guess the first question is, if the FCC makes a decision next week, then there's legal action pretty quickly thereafter. Is there going to be a period, or is there likely to be a period where this throttling, blocking, et cetera, activity is moving forward?
I think folks are going to sort of wait and see what's going to happen. I don't think anyone's going to see dramatic change quickly. So if you're reading media articles that say that the internet is coming to an end on December 14th, that's probably not accurate. And these may be changes that sort of slowly come about over time.
Well, and you say over time, I mean, this has been a conversation in Washington for a long time. The net neutrality debate is not a new one.
This has been a debate since about 2005.
So, what's a reasonable time horizon here before we get some resolution?
Well, like I said, I think the ultimate resolution is going to be legislation, and I think, whether or not it would happen before the next elections in 2018, I don't know, and the political environment could be very different after 2018. Unfortunately, it's hard to make any sound prediction, but I do think eventually legislation is going to be the solution to this problem.
Potentially
I agree.
David, go ahead. Yes, please.
Well, I do agree. I absolutely agree. This is going to wind its way through the courts. I would tell you, we could avoid a lot of that. A number of years ago, my chairman, John Coyle, proposed fair display guidelines for consumer-facing portals, and it was a list of a dozen or 15 different statements that the portals agreed to do, and all of them essentially agreed to do it. If we could get the internet providers the consent that they would agree to some form of fair use guidelines, that would eliminate a lot of any heartache or angst that we might have. But I would just say the internet has become such a key part of how we live and how we work, and it's controlled by companies that thus far have demonstrated that they got a long and dubious history of curious fees, of overbilling, and not terribly good service, and that's not a recipe for a strong and innovative future for the vast majority of us. It's really a recipe for 5-alarm chili, and we're on the menu. So for my peers that are out there in the industry that are listening and they want more information, certainly Corporate Ally is a good place to go. CMLS is a good place to go. And probably the granddaddy of all of this is probably Matt Cohen with Clarity Core Logic, that would probably be real happy to help give you some information on this very important topic.
Well, David, you mentioned some of the angst that's out there. I know if there's one thing businesses don't like, it's uncertainty, and we have the potential for a long process here. I mean, are you hearing from your colleagues that they're they're nervous about this, or that this being stuck in this sort of liminal period is a problem for them?
Well, nobody's. I'm going to be careful how I say it. We're not losing sleep over it yet. We are absolutely consumed with other issues facing us that are right front and center, as opposed to just those that are on the horizon. But obviously, we're keeping an eye on it. But if we take our eye off of what's in front of us, the horizon's going to have to come closer to us before we get absolutely crazy about it. And so it's why I'm glad folks like Melanie are spending time looking at these issues and keeping us abreast of what's important. So the answer is we're gonna keep doing our business, but we're gonna keep an eye on it. But there's nothing we can do. We can't adjust to it right now, other than I would say I would not work with any entity that I was partnering with, that I was relying on for any service or technology, that would not join me in this fight.
Interesting.
And I think that that's the best thing we can do right now in any agreement, any understanding, whether it's a handshake or whether it's in a written agreement. This is a fight that is definitely going to come down the pike, and I want some guarantees that my partner and I stood aligned.
Melanie, this is a more of a technical question, and again, if I'm getting beyond where you want to be, we can roll on to the next question. But thinking in the DC area, you've got the Greater Capital Association of Realtors, where you've got folks in Virginia, Maryland, and DC, licensed in all three, doing business in all three. Are there telecommunication laws or rules that affect things at the state level where it would matter if you were doing cross-state business?
Well, not necessarily, but actually the fact that you raised state law makes a good point. This is another area where this FCC order goes beyond. You talked about earlier, aren't we just rolling the rules back to where we were at 2015? In this order, not only is the FCC sort of leaving the field as far as regulating the internet, they're also prohibiting states from enacting their own net neutrality protections. So they're saying we're not going to regulate the internet, and states, we don't want you to pass laws to do the same sort of thing. So again, in many cases when the federal government decides they're not going to regulate in an area, various states might decide that they're going to step in. This order from the FCC would prohibit states from doing that.
Is there anything we can learn from, I don't know if other countries are going through this as well? I mean, we're not the only country with an internet, right? So how is this happening in other places, and anything we can learn from those processes?
That's probably true, but that is beyond my expertise. Really, is what's happening internationally on this.
Let me ask you the worst case scenario then. And I see David's laughing. He probably didn't want to touch that one either. So let's say there is a period where net neutral rules are rolled back, or even there's a defeat in we're living in a world where net neutrality doesn't exist. Are there strategies that MLSs, brokers, agents, et cetera, should be thinking about for how to conduct their business and how to move forward? David, you might want to jump in on this one as well.
I would just say that I think, you mentioned earlier, I think we are going to be in a bit of uncertainty for the next year or so. And so it's just a matter of monitoring the situation. Obviously, we at NAR are going to continue to fight on this issue. And if there are questions, if the folks out there watching this have questions about what's happening here in Washington or elsewhere, please feel free to contact me. There's always resources on the NAR webpage. If you just go on the NAR webpage and type in net neutrality, you'll find a whole source of host of resources and a way to contact me or my colleagues at NAR that can answer any questions folks might have.
And I should mention, if anybody's coming in late to this, even as we're coming towards the end, if you want to see it in its entirety, we will make the full video available, so keep an eye out for it on nar.realtor, keep an eye out for it here on Facebook. It'll be there for you. You know, speaking of resources, anything else you would want to flag for people that if they wanted to learn more, if there was somebody they needed to reach out to, or, you know, even in their own business, are there people inside of a business who should be keeping an eye on this?
I mean, I think,
IT person,
yeah, I was going to say, most IT folks will know about this just because this is, the internet is the backbone of what they do, and they're probably personally interested in an issue like this. I think, though, for the most up-to-date resources on what's happening, I think the NAR website is probably the best place to go.
Actually, in thinking of outside resources, I mean, NAR is obviously taking a position on this, but who are our allies in this? I mean, who else is working with us?
A lot of the large companies that provide content on the internet, so folks like Facebook and Amazon and Twitter are involved. But the fact that NAR has been involved has actually been very important in this debate because it's being characterized here in Washington as a fight between Silicon Valley and the internet service providers. And our voice has really been one telling both Congress and regulators at the FCC, no, really, this is, and David mentioned this at the start of this program, that this is really a Main Street issue and that we as realtors are the Main Street voice, and this impacts us in a very dramatic way. So we want policymakers to know that this isn't just a fight between Silicon Valley and telecom companies, that this really impacts Main Street, and so that the actions that they're taking are really going to impact a very broad swath of the American economy.
David, I want to give you a chance to bite at my last question as well. I mean, if net neutrality were to go away, I mean, what would be your advice to an MLS or a company working in our industry on how to move forward?
Well, at the risk of repeating, work with people that support your position. It's more important now than ever that you understand that you are in this together with them and that they're with you. So I feel like that's the best thing we can do. Melanie already spoke about the resources that are available. Here's the challenge. Information on real estate, on properties, is ubiquitous. But if the consumer believes that the information is indeed everywhere, then getting that person's attention is just terribly expensive. So it's incumbent upon the owner of much of that information, and in this instance, the broker, to tell his or her story. So we're now going to place another impediment toward getting that information out to the consumer in a logical fashion, and by potentially placing a toll or a tax on immediate access to all the relevant information on a property from the guys or gals that created it. That is ludicrous. That we should have to do that, or that our customers should have to do that. So I'm a huge proponent of the coalition here. Melanie references several large companies that are in alignment with NAR on this, which is just great. It's part of that whole corporate ally program, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it and to be a voice to the extent that I can help. Carry the mail for you, Melanie, on this. Let me know how I can help in any other way.
I know Melanie won't be shy, and that's probably a good place to end it. So I do want to thank everybody for watching and for sending in your questions. Again, we are going to make this video available in its entirety, so stay with us on nar.realtor, stay with us on Facebook. You can probably find it on YouTube as well when we get it all wrapped up. We'll make the whole thing available, and as updates are coming, again, you'll find those on nar.realtor. So thanks everyone for watching.